This is a video about the Turners of Kirkleatham, starting with John Turner, who built the hall in about 1835. I suspect it's going to take more than one video. I'll video it all and then chop it up into bits before I stick them on the internet. Many of the records of which I've got are on my computer, and unfortunately when you're taking video on computer you get this sort of interference, sort of Fresnel experience, wavy lines. The only way to overcome that is to print all these photographs off and then video them, video the prints. Obviously this is a really time-consuming business, and not to mention the expense. And as it's purely a record, a historical record, then I don't think it really matters. So I haven't printed them off, and there are lots of little lines waving about on some of them, but I hope they aren't too distracting. It's probably only of interest to those who know a little bit about Kirkleatham or a bit about local history. So it's a bit rough and ready. If bits are repeated or bits seem in the wrong order, then I do apologise for that. But I don't have the time to fine-tune it, as it were. The thing about history is that you tend to use secondary sources. In other words, people who've looked at the records, and then people who've looked at the people who looked at the records. And if somebody makes a mistake with a date or a name, then that tends to be perpetuated. The only way around it is to go and look at the primary records, the originals, birth certificates and so on. But to do that would take a lifetime. So if there are any mistakes on here, then please accept my apologies. It's been a very interesting thing to do. At least I found it interesting. And I hope that some of it will interest you as well. Anyway, I'll say no more and get on with it. This was the first of the line, John Turner. He came from Hereford, and he came to manage the Lord Challoner's, that was Lord Gisborough's, alum mines in Gisborough. And he bought the estate there, as you can see, from Sir William Bellasis, and he built the hall. And he'd married Elizabeth Coulthurst from Kirkleatham. Her father, Robert, he was a wealthy woolen merchant, and he died at a very old age. He died when he was 90, having lived through the reigns of 6 monarchs. And the estate then passed to this guy, John, the eldest son. He was a barrister. He was a sergeant at arms in London, and he and his missus, Jane Pepys, they had a grand life in London. They lived in a big house in Salisbury Court and had a coach. And the stained glass window in Kirkleatham Church shows John on one side and Sir William Turner on the other. This fella is very well known, William. He was the third son, so he obviously wasn't going to inherit the estate. So he had to make his own way, and he made his way down to London. became a woolen merchant, and he made a vast fortune. When he died, he left £6 million. I don't know what that's worth today, but by God, it's a lot of money. And he was knighted by Charles II, and he did lots of good works. He hadn't forgotten Kirkleatham. And he was responsible for the building of the almshouses in Kirkleatham in 1676. And in his will, he left £5,000 to this fellow, his grandson, Cholmley or Chumley. And it was intended that Chumley would go down to London to become a woolen merchant. And this £5,000 was intended for that. But there were conditions attached to it, in that if he failed to fulfil this, some of this £5,000 had to be spent on building a school at Kirkleatham, a free school. Well, needless to say, Chumley didn't live up to his uncle's expectations as far as becoming a merchant, but he did build the free school in Kirkleatham, which is now, of course, a museum. It was built in 1709. It's a fine building, wonderful building. There's masses of information about William on the internet and elsewhere. So these are the almshouses at Kirkleatham, beautifully renovated. There's the Turners coat of arms, which became the school badge. They were built in 1676 with money provided by Sir William Turner, who the school was named after, down at Kirkleatham in Redcar. And it was for 10 poor women and 10 poor men. Women lived on the left-hand side, men lived on the right-hand side. This little figure in a niche. So this is the women's side of it. And this is the men's side. Chumley Turner was left £5,000 by Sir William Turner to go and become a woolen merchant in London, and if he failed to do that, then there were certain terms and conditions, one of which was to build this school. And again, there's lots of information about it, without me going into it any further. So, Chumley and his wife had 2 children. Marwood William, unfortunately, it says that he died in Italy, but he didn't. He died in Lyon in France when he was on a grand tour. He was only 21. This is the Turner Mausoleum. It's undergoing renovation at the moment. They got a big grant to do it. The roof was leaking. It's leaded and disappeared at some time. And there's an inscription round the side which has been renovated. Just go and have a look at it. So this mausoleum was erected 1740 to the memory of Marwood William Turner, Esquire, the best of sons. Marwood William Turner was the only son of Chumley Turner, And like all of these young aristocrats, he went on the grand tour of Europe, and he died in Italy when he was 21. And so the succession passed to Cholmondeley's brother, William. The whole of this alcove here has been defaced by mindless idiots. A shame. Absolute morons. And then there was Jane. It was Jane Marwood Turner. She eloped with a guy called Philip William Casimir van Strobensee. That's the correct pronunciation. This guy was Dutch. He was a soldier, and he came across to England in 1745 when the Jacobite rebellion was going on in Scotland. And he came over to fight as a mercenary on the English side. Anyway, her mother, Jane, she didn't approve. And so she disinherited her. Anyway, the Strobensees, the Van Strobensees, they set up in Spennythorn in Wensleydale, just up the road from here. And there's lots of information about them there. They did very, very well. One of the young Strobensees, one of his descendants, is a friend of Prince William, our future king, and Lady Diana Spencer. She was a nanny in her younger days to one of the Van Strobensees. So there being no heirs from Cholmondeley, the estate was inherited by his uncle William. This guy here. So this is the said William. And when he died, it passed to his son Charles. Now, he spent much of his fortune revamping the whole place. He was educated at Beverley Grammar School. Most of them seem to be educated at Eton in London, or just outside London. But he rebuilt the village, rebuilt 14 brick houses around a little square in Kirkleatham village. And there were shops there. There was a blacksmith, a wheelwright, a butcher, and a general store, although where they got the customers from, I have no idea. Yerby village, which was on the estate to the south, was a sort of a series of what were described as hovels, and he built some brick cottages there. He also did away with lots of little ale houses which were in the area, and a sort of haunts of smugglers and ne'er-do-wells, and opened a pub called the Turners Arms. It was later closed by one of his descendants, a very puritanical woman, we'll talk about her in a minute, and it became the Turners Arms Farm, which of course is still there. He also saw the benefits of establishing a health resort down at Cortham, down by the sea, and he brought in such things as bathing huts, so you could get changed without. In fact, they were over the sea, so they were wheeled down to the sea, so you could disrobe and bathe in the sea without anybody seeing you. And of course, having seen to everybody else, he also looked after himself, and he considerably extended and modernised Kirkleatham Hall itself. Now, he was married twice. He married Elizabeth Wombwell, and they had no children. And for his second marriage, he married Mary Shuttleworth of Fawcett, which was a big estate near Darlington. The last time I was there, the big gates were lying on the ground, and recently I've noticed that it's been up for sale for, I think it's something like £2.5 million. Gawthorpe was another family seat. This place here was another family seat. This is Gawthorpe Hall, which is the home of the Shuttleworth family, the family home of Anne Shuttleworth, Charles Turner's wife. It's in Lancashire near Padiham, and I think it's owned by the National Trust. We'll come back to Mary Shuttleworth on a later video. She married this fella, Thomas Gascoigne. But she and Charles had two children, Mary and another Charles, and it was this Charles, he inherited the estate. Now, his main hobbies were hunting and racing. And he owned a string of racehorses, including one called Hambletonian, which is probably the best racehorse of its day. But when he asked his wife's father for her hand in marriage, his wife's father, Sir William Gledow, said that before he would allow it, Charles had to give up his racing activities. And he must have loved her an awful lot, because they did in fact end up getting married. The main interest of the Turners was horse racing. They spent vast sums of money on horse racing and made a fair amount on the as well. And this is one of the most famous horses which they owned, a horse called Hambleton, or Hambletonian. And I'll just scan down this and you can read it at your leisure. It's quite interesting read. It's an interesting little bit. He must have loved her an awful lot to give up his racing. And we'll have a look at this Flying Dutchman a little later. But they had no children. And when he died in 1810, he left her absolutely everything. So she was a rich widow. She was only 35, no children, and owner of this big estate at Kirkleatham. Together with monies which she'd probably inherited from her own family, the Gledow Newcomens. This just comes to explain where this surname Gledow or Gledow comes from. It comes from Ireland. This was the sort of main man, Sir William Gledow, and he set up the Newcomen Bank in Dublin in 1871. And when he was hard up, he borrowed money from his own bank. I'm sure it's illegal. It's certainly illegal now. And when he died, he owed his own bank 43,000 quid. That's a fortune. And he married this Viscountess Newcomen, and she was quite a wealthy woman from her own side of the family, and they had 2 children. And this fella, the son, and he inherited the bank, but he was like his dad. He borrowed even more, and it came about he owed 163,000 quid to the bank's customers, which is about 10 million quid in today's money, even more probably. And he obviously got too much for him, because he went into the bank's office and he shot himself. The bank is still there, the building's still there. It's now the Dublin's rates office, apparently. So everything came to this woman here, Teresa Gledow Newcomen. And as I said earlier, when he wanted to marry her, this fella, her father, told him he had to pack in this ruinous racing business he was in, by buying horses for a small fortune. Now this is why this fella, who was born in 1877, this is why he is called Henry Gledow Turner Newcomen. These are the 3 surnames of the family. He was in fact called Gledow. That was what he was called, that's what they called him in the family. He was known as Gledow. And so she was quickly snapped up by this fella called Henry Vansittart, if that's the right pronunciation. This fella here, whose family was based in Foxley in Berkshire. They got married in 1812, and he too, he was a great one for horse racing, and he bred a horse called the Flying Dutchman, which was probably the best horse of its generation, in fact probably the best horse for several generations. But he sold it to a Lord Eglinton, and at this point we'll put a video in about that, a second video about their horse racing activities. So this is the Flying Dutchman, and it was bred by Mr. Henry Vansittart, who had married Sir Charles Turner's widow. This was the most famous racehorse of its day. Let's go down there and tell you a little bit about it. It also tells you a little interesting bit here about where the Vansittarts got their money from. And the Flying Dutchman was sold to the 13th Earl of Eglinton. He had married Teresa Newcomen, whose uncle was Sir Charles Turner, the one who died in 1810. That was her uncle by marriage. There were 3 Teresa Newcomens, which makes it all a bit confusing. But she had married the 13th Earl of Eglinton. He said it was the greatest mistake of his life. Bit sad. So this is the record of the Flying Dutchman. Absolutely amazing. Derby, St Leger. It was only beaten once. By a horse called Voltiger. And they had a rematch at York. There's a little bit about it there. Interesting bit. Some people walked for several days to York to witness this event. And the Flying Dutchman beat Voltiger. Now I was told, quite reliably, that the Flying Dutchman was brought back to Kirkleatham, back to the Vansittarts, and was buried in the field just outside Kirkleatham Hall Gardens, where there's, or used to be, a big mound. But when you read this, it says there that he died at a stud in France. So, which is true or what, I don't know. These are the walled gardens. They're enormous for Kirkleatham Hall. Obviously over there against that wall, which are halfway down the gardens, would have been greenhouses. And behind them potting sheds. They seem to be renovating the walls bit by bit. So there you can see the remains of the potting sheds. And the Turners of houses behind. But this wall was allowed to go to rock and ruin. It seems to have been much repaired. And here, when I was a kid, was the house of the people who ran the market garden. I can't remember their names now. There's the Turner Arms houses. Now if I just turn around, I was reliably informed that just outside the walls here, in the corner of this field, was a big mound which marked the grave of a very famous racehorse. I was told it was Flying Dutchman, which was bred by Mr. Vansittart of Kirkleatham Hall, which won the Derby. But when you look at the information, it died at a stud in France in about 1770. So I suspect it might have been Flying Dutchman's mother, the mare, which was called Barbell, and it was owned by Mr. Vansittart. But this big pile here, I suspect, is rubble from the walls. So there's an old picture of Kirkleatham Hall when Mr. Henry Vansittart lived there, and this is from Ord's book. Interesting then that when this lithograph was made, and to the right hand side there, as you look at the photograph, you can see the sea.